Hi there and welcome along. Thank you for checking in, and I hope you enjoy this session today. This book is in reasonably easy access for me to look at, and I looked at it the other day. I came across a Rook and Pawn Endgame, and I studied that, and I was able to work out the simple one, and then there was a more difficult position that was on the in this book for Rook and Pawn Endgame. Very difficult. Rook and Pawn Endgames are part of chess. Rook and Pawn Endgames are part of chess. And what happened was I tried to analyze as much as I could in my head with this book. So that is what happened. And I've just banged the table and it's like boom. And so I would just want to bring you two games that I played in the classical arena, whereby you can see the game that I drew, and my opponent got a lot of points for that because my opponent just deserved a draw, I think. And I don't think I'm going to win that position. This is the position I'm talking about here, if my mouse is showing you. I think it is, I'm not sure. That ended in a draw. So I ended up getting 3.5 out of 4, but I noticed that I had 2 Rook and Pawn Endgames in this tournament today, where I've only played 4 games in the 20-minute and 10-second increment classical. I think it's the Classical Shield Arena, so it's once a month or something like that. So here we go. Let's have a look at these 2 positions. I will go from the actual 2 positions rather than going through all the moves at the start. Okay, hope you enjoy it. And so I'm going to go out the picture now, but I am going to leave Queen Elizabeth II watching on, the greatest queen that we've ever had, I think. Well, the longest serving monarch, and I can say a lot of things about her, and I do really think that she's the best queen she could be, and there you go. So I'm going to just turn my face off, and I hope you enjoy this small session. I maybe will not try to make it too long. So here is the first starting position. This is the first starting position, and my phone's going, but I am doing the session, and I probably should have hid the phone away somewhere where it's not going to be an earshot. But anyway, it's disturbing my concentration of all things as well. Here's the first starting position, where white now captures the d4 pawn with the queen, and this offers a queen swap, which my opponent accepted. And so now we have probably even a better position for black in this position right now. But we are into a Rook and Pawn and a Rook and Pawn Endgame. So we've got 2 rooks on each, of course, a pair of rooks each. And it soon comes about that only 1 rook is left each for each player. So here we go. This could be a draw, okay? This could be a draw, easy. This could be an easy draw for black or white. So rook d8. So I'm not going to look at analysis from the machine. Stockfish 14. Here's rook d8, which is already attacking my d4 pawn. So I already have to labor myself on defending this d4 pawn. So I play rook d3, rook d5, rook a d1. So we've got sort of like the starting position. And Nimzovich wrote or said in his book, because Nimzovich said in his book, black he would probably say that black is better because black's attacking and white's defending. This is a backward pawn. This d4 pawn is backward. It's not like there's a pawn here and white's not having to look after the d4 pawn. So I have to look after this pawn, okay, on d4, of course, because if I lose that, I may lose the game of chess, unless I play moves like rook here, okay, and then black plays rook takes pawn, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook c8 check, rook d8, rather sad for black, and rook d8. So I can play some wee tricks, but there are some tricks for black player here to play as well. Namely, if I move my king up to e3, okay, then think, oh, I can move this rook away now because I'm defending the d4 pawn twice, then black has the wee trick rook takes pawn on e5, and that being check, and then I cannot recapture, although I can recapture as rook d1, unless I got the rook there on c1, c3. So I've got to be careful, okay? So here we go. And the thing is with Rook and Pawn Endgames, or any endgame, is it's always good to go pawn grabbing, okay, just munching pawns, and also scheme a lot. Scheme. Think about, what can I do better than what I'm already doing? But what can I do that I can do better? What can I do? So anyway, king f2. So it's about scheming where I can put things. What can I do? Can I improve on this position, or is it just going to end up a draw as the other one was? I thought, well, I can go for a win in this drawn position. I could go for a win, but I might risk it and lose. And normally I'd probably risk it. King f2, f6. So this is breaking up the pawn structure from before, and of course it threatens just fe5 for black. But this is breaking up maybe the better pawn formation for black than previous. ef6, gf6. So now we all have sort of like 3 islands with pawns. Probably white stands worse because mine is isolated. King e3 and king e4. Now, this looks very sort of equal, doesn't it? Rook c8, and then here come a lot of moves here. Rook h3, king g7. Don't try this at home. Rook c3, rook cd8, rook c7. Now asking the question, do you want to lose a pawn, or are we going to have a rook swap off? Now, there's actually things I can see here that might be even easier than what I played. But here we have a swap off, and I'm careful not to swap off too many things, but I might be able to play d5 here. I'm not sure, but I didn't. I chickened out. I played rook d3, so that if e5, I can just play, I don't know, it's sort of like probably going to be a draw, but after here, maybe e5 is possible, and de5 or d5, and this pawn is back, so if black tries to come up to g6, I can play g4, preventing f5, the big square f5, the greatest square on the board. But so we have to scheme and sort of like, if I may say so, play like it's checkers, because it's not simple, but we have to sort of like take away the thing that we're thinking in the middle game, where we're thinking, let's attack. I'm trying to attack, don't you worry about that. But let's attack and try to get checkmate. But really, the end game is not likely that we're going to get a checkmate from white's king or black's king. It's not going to really happen too easily unless we set it up. But there are checkmates, and there are embarrassing moves for me to make, like f5 and king e5, and then I have to go, then my opponent might go rook d5 check. No, king f7 and then rook d5 check, and those sorts of things. So scheming is so important in endgames. It's so important. It's like the bread and butter of endgames is scheming and pawn hunting. Grab the pawns, go munching pawns, completely the opposite from the middle game or opening, to grab pawns all over the place, to go on a pawn snuffle. Rook d3, king f7. So if I was to ask Stockfish would of course say this is an equal position, or it's probably better for black. Rook a3, just a wee ping, b6, and rook h3. Now notice that there's one open file, this one. There's only one open file. Okay, there's only one open file. And one rook each. So this is the only open file. If black ever captures on c3, if I've got a rook on c3, and this is the scheming part of it, and they capture the rook, then I have opportunity to play bc3 and maybe c4. But you might say, well, black would have b5, wouldn't they, to prevent b5 would prevent c4, which is correct. So we kind of have to try to find the best way to go about things and that sort of thing. And it's not always clear, even if the book makes it look very clear. Rook g3, king f7, rook c3. Here we go, onto the c file. And f5 happens, and this is, be wary, David, because if you go to e5 now, okay, or f4 or f3, this pawn's going to be lost. As if king e5, then rook d5 check, and then the king has no other square but to go to f4, and then rook d4 wins a pawn for black. This pawn is gone. See, it's gone after rook d4 check. The king has to move, and then the rook can come back to d7 and then consolidate the position. And that would probably be done with some care for black, but black should win that. So I played here king e3, I think is the only move. I might be able to play king f3 and then rook to c7, which will result in one pawn of black's going, but I didn't feel like that one. King e3, so that if f4 now, then just king up to e4, and this pawn here on f4 would be weak, wouldn't it? It'd be ready for me to pick up with my rook with check, and even if I have to pin it with g3, make sure that I definitely win it without any issue. So moving on, king f6, g3. Now maybe the computer's saying bad move, bad move, bad move, like it did the other day. h5, and now play rook c8. Excuse me. So now this d4 pawn is still bugging me. Now, my opponent played a5, but maybe e5 is good, but it isn't, is it? That's right. I remember e5's no good because if e5, okay, then I just play rook c6 check. And then pawn takes pawn, and I win a pawn. Yay. So here's a5, and black is threatening b5, I think. That's what I think. And we will have a trade-off, and I don't really want one. So I played a4 to prevent b5. Whether that's any good or not, maybe I should just see this as a draw. King e3, b5, white is being met with pawn exchanges, which, if I want to win, is not a good idea for me to have. I'm not a piece up or anything, but I do want to try to win this. So what would be your move now? I chose this move here. And as I always say, whether it's any good or not is another question. I played here rook c8. My opponent went ba4, I went rook c4, chasing the pawn again. And this brings about, maybe I was lucky here in this game. Rook b2, rook a5, king f4, making sure there's no nasty checkmates, because if the pawn was able to move to e5 without being able to be captured by pawn or rook, then it's checkmate. So I had to make sure that it wasn't checkmate, because I just have to. That's all there is to it. But what about this? Now what do I do? Okay, what do I do now? I, of course, play a4. And here's where my opponent, to be fair to black, drops the ball. And I don't know why, but I was actually thinking maybe I will ask my opponent what happened. Maybe my opponent just dropped the ball, played e5. And they did drop the ball, didn't they? So it's d-e5 check, king e6, rook a6 to be a pain, and that's very good in chess. Now my opponent almost obliges. Maybe my opponent just got annoyed with this game and thought, I can't be bothered. Or maybe it's just because I'm a little bit better than them in the endgame, which is usually the case when you're playing someone rated lower than yourself. Then you might be a little bit better in the endgame than they are. I don't know. Is that correct? Probably. No good now is king to d5 as rook d6 check, and rook d3 and e6, e7, e8. Queen. Here was king f7, and so we can all see rook f6 check, king g7, rook f5, rook here, king here, rook g4, almost checkmate, isn't it? King h5, rook g3, rook g5 check, forcing rook takes rook, hg5, and game over. Now, the second game I want to show you, I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you're watching. It's okay if you're not, but I would like to show you the second Rook and Pawn Endgame right now. So here is game 2. My opponent has just played a5 on move 22, and I play move 23, queen g5, hg5. Maybe I'm too confident. A4. Rook a d8, so another rook on the d file again. And by the way, I was playing berserk mode in this game, and my opponent has at the moment 20 minutes and 18 seconds So sort of like playing quite fast, and that's okay. And I have only got 6 minutes and 08 seconds left. Here I played with this also rendering down to a single rook and pawn pair or pair of rooks left on the board as well shortly. Rook d8 and c5. And whether this is any good or not, it's the one that I went with. bc5, dc5, rook c8. Black is hitting quickly my c5 pawn, so I have to make sure that I defend it quickly, else black will gang up on it. And so if I just do nothing at the moment, then one, rook c5 will happen. Maybe I could go rook d1 sort of thing, one of the rooks to d1, but then I think it will be better for black. I think that black's rook c5 and rook e5 would be quite reasonable. I'd be quite happy playing the black pieces. Here I went rook a c1, rook c6, and here rook c4. I think we have a finger drop here, to be fair. My opponent played rook d8. I think my opponent played a finger drop. And I played rook fc1, rook dc8. So there we have it. Now bring the king into protection of c5 so that this time I can actually move my rook one of around, even though I have to watch out for pawn e on b3, which is a wee bit of a weakness that black can sort of nibble at. And so this is what I'm talking about, that I'm scheming to bring my king to e3, thereby I can free up one of my rooks maybe, but maybe this is going to be a draw as well. So I really, 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 in my heart of hearts, believe that this position is probably drawn if we look at what Stockfish has to say about it. King f8. So I found in endgame books that a lot of it is just a process, is just like thinking a structural process about where am I going to go in this position. Now the best thing I can do now is not play what I did. The best thing I can do now is play, I think in hindsight, rook to f1. Thereby I'm preventing f6 move, which occurs shortly. Here I played rook 1 c3 and my opponent went f6, and this is now offering me the chance to go wrong and that sort of thing. And also it offers me the opportunity of freeing up one of my rooks, and also the pawns look quite bad for black after ef6. But I didn't play ef6 check here. I played h3, and I found that as soon as the move f5 came on the board, I think I thought I've made a mistake, and I think I have. So what do I do now? I played rook f3, f4, and before, when I said that I'm going to try to show you, what is it I'm trying to say? We'll try to show you something. I don't know, I've forgotten. Sorry, my brain's a bit on another subject today because something else has occurred today which I'm not going to go into detail about, but someone has passed away, followed the Queen, and that's nibbling at my brain and my concentration. But I cannot divulge what I'm talking about because I don't believe I've been given that right to do here on the internet. So rook fc3, king f7, king e4. But I'm not going to say I found that out prior to this game here. That's not what I'm going to say. King e7 now. What's your move now? This changes the dynamic or the dynamics of this position at hand. I played here a move that, like I said, might not be any good, but it certainly looked good to me at the time. Sorry, king e7, I played what do I play? Sorry, h4. Now gh4 was played and I went king f4. So, oh, that's right, that's what I was saying. I want to free up one of my rooks by protecting it, the c5 pawn with king and pawn. Thereby I've got a rook free. But things in chess or whatever never, ever, ever turn out the way someone always wants them to turn out. So because I'm playing against black, here's rook h8, rook h3. I want to blockade this pawn rather than just merely go king g5, which might look okay, but first I want to blockade this pawn. Thereby I threaten king g5, I think, rook h7 and king g5. So here we have a momentary lapse in reason. And here I was actually, believe it or not, thinking that, oh no, what do I do about rook b6? This is what I was thinking during this game. I was thinking, what do I do about rook b6? And I think you see what I was going to answer that with after some hindsight. And it's just funny, isn't it, chess? I mean, like, how can I even look at the move for black, rook b6? Maybe I want black to go down rather badly. It's sad now that it looks like black is going to lose a pawn, and I think that's the case, because this pawn, these two pawns here, and these two pawns here, of course, prevent d6 pawn move for black. So here I chomp the rook pawn, and the rook captures, and now we are down to a single or a pair of rooks on the board. And I might even have checkmating possibilities. I might have them. And I think that this didn't go particularly well, this part of the game for me, which is probably okay. King g7, king g5, I've got the opposition, but I can't move in. Can't move in here, and I can not. But if the king moves to f7 or h7, then of course I can move in there or there, if I do. Or maybe I will do something else. But this one, I think, turned out quite difficult. It almost turned out to be sort of like, how am I going to win this, or am I going to lose it, or that sort of thing. King f4 doesn't look very good, does it? And a rook here. Now I'm relinquishing my wonderful c5 pawn, and I asked, is that okay? And my pawn said, nothing, doesn't talk. Rook, king e7, and then I got, oh no, I got this dilemma. Do I go back to c4? Yep, okay, I do. And I might trade places. Rook b8, rook c3. Now the rook can go to the b file to attack the b3 pawn, because it cannot be captured with the pawn on b6. Rook b4, what do I do? Go back or forwards? Or do I play rook c4? I play king g5. Now, rook e4 happens. This is getting quite knobbly, isn't it? King g6. And now maybe black can play, which I think black can play, rook g4. I think that rook g4 is good for black here, and I think that I just lose a pawn, but my opponent went rook e5, and so now I fastened down the g5 pawn, see? And now rook d5 happens, c6, I'm swapping off pawns again, David, what are you doing? c6, dc6, rook c6, I've got a wee rank for my rook on 7th rank if I like it there. I have to maybe look at doing some bridge building. Now, what's bridge building? Bridge building is, to put it bluntly or practically easy to understand, is where we give our king a square to move to where the rook comes in between the other rook, the opposing rook, and prevents it being checked all the time. So the rook just acts as a sort of a bridge between the rook checking the king or not checking the king. In this case, my king, the white king. Rook d3, rook c7. Now the king comes up to d6, and I'm starting to think I'm going to lose this, okay? So I'm on the back foot now. I'm on the back foot. That's the beauty about these endgames. e5, not really. Rook b6 check, and I'm probably fumbling the ball everywhere you look. King d5, rook b5, king d4, king f5. I was starting to panic. I was starting to panic, dear Watson, but I think e4 g6. Oh dear, look at this. Look at this. Rook g3. Very good, because black gets behind the g6 pawn. It's always best to get behind the pawn, whether you're pushing it or defending it with rooks. It's always best to get behind the pawn, passed pawn in this case. Now, what's wrong with me ganging up on this pawn now? Okay, what is wrong with me ganging up on this pawn now with rook e5 threatening rook e4 check? Is coming up right now rook g6. Now, even after rook g6, rook e4, that's because it's the last thing I said, we still have king d3, and if king g6, then king e4, etc. And it's then one game for black because of this a5 pawn. I think. I might be wrong. My opponent now, I played now rook a5, realizing that rook e5 isn't very good, and it's actually saying all these ideas, e3, rook g1, rook g2, rook c3, rook d3, rook e3, rook f3, all these sorts of things it's coming up with. I'm not sure what that's all about. It's probably saying black is 1, and so e3, and rook b5. So what's the move you're going to play now? Resign? Probably. Look at this. I think I'm losing this. Rook b4 check and king c3. I don't think this is the right one to go. I think that here, I think king d3, and I'm going to be squirming. I don't think I have much there. But upon king c3, I played rook e4, thereby threatening rook e2, and also, as previously mentioned, getting behind this e2 pawn. Yes, it's that far away, David. It's on e2. It's just one square away from queen. But I have compensation, Your Honour. I have compensation. Rook G2. Are there any tricks here for black? Can black play King D2? Not really. White has got pawns on both fronts, on the queen side and the king side, and there again I mentioned the queen, which has left me somewhat a little bit down about it, but not because she had a good spell, a good good time on this earth, but it's to do with the look that she gave me when she was walking towards me. She was giving me this sort of like, who's this mad, crazy man? But no, she didn't. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to continue here with Rook G2. Now, this is the move that black chose, but I don't think it's the best, but it's really quite tentative, isn't it? Really, I think. I now march my king to F6 and King D2, and now what would you play? Are you going to play Rook E2 for white or something else? I played here on move 65 G7, and now how's the time going? I've got 47 seconds. My opponent's got 23 minutes and 14 seconds left. So I've got 47 seconds, 0.7, and that is all I've got, whereas my opponent keeps on getting 10 seconds every time they move. So I'm getting wiped out on time. If it's about time in this game, I've lost completely. I'm not going to win the race for time. E1 Queen. I'll have to take that. King E1, and now we have almost the coup de grace, which is King F7, threatening F G8 Queen. The king comes to try to catch the pawns, but it's a little bit too late, and the pawns will never be able to be defended, because even if black gets their king here, they can never capture this pawn, as this pawn runs away like the little piggy. And how many pigs were there? 3 little pigs? No, that's another one. Was it 5 pigs? I'm not sure. I don't even know. How silly. Now I played G8 Queen, which is my only move, I think, of the game. King G8, and now we have King C3, A5, King B4, A6, and that is the end of the session. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you watched it, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it, and I certainly do, because these Rook and Pawn Endgames that FIDE Master Daniel Gong, New Zealand chess champion, loves endgames that are Rook and Pawn endgames. So just to mention that, and if you haven't seen that interview of Daniel Gong, I do suggest that you might like to have a look at it, because Daniel Gong has got an amazing, FIDE Master Daniel Gong of New Zealand has got such an amazing attitude towards losing that Magnus doesn't share with him, I've found out recently. Okay, bye.